Interests. We got people from JPL, the science side, and we got people from the Star Trek side as well. So let's start off with introductions. Randy, let's start with you, and we'll just go down.
My name is Randy Wesson. I've been working at the lab for 33 years, everything from Voyager, Galileo, all those guys. I now do advanced mission concepts, so stuff that's 20 to 40 years out-ish, more than that gets science fiction.
Cool. My name is David Delgado. I'm a visual strategist at JPL. We have a little design studio where we get to help to kind of communicate the underlying themes that push science and technology forward.
My name is Mareike Jorditzman. I'm a UX designer at the Ops Lab. We work with emerging technologies like augmented and virtual reality to transform the way that we do operations.
At JPL.
At JPL.
My name is Stephen Charles Jaffe. I produced Ghost, Star Trek VI, and Strange Days with James Cameron. I'm the COO and co-founder of Springbok Entertainment, Springbok Cares. We're now running a virtual reality patient initiative at USC Norris Hospital for cancer patients. Curated, healthy, escapist entertainment.
Hi, I'm Mark Haynes. I'm a writer. I work primarily in comics, but I'm going back and forth now between film and TV and the comic book world. And I've written for Battlestar Galactica, 24, and now writing comic book versions of Stargate Atlantis and Stargate Universe. And I think I'm up here because one of my first experiences, which they didn't really talk about too much, was that you could pitch to the various Star Trek TV shows without an agent when they were still on the air. I don't think that tradition is continuing, though, because I've checked. So anyway, hi.
I am James T. Kirk.
Sweet.
No, I'm Trevor Roth. I run Roddenberry Entertainment. I'm an executive producer on the newest Star Trek series coming out. And we do so many different things. I can't name them all, but I'm glad to be here.
And thank you. And I'm Steve Peters. I'm the CCO of No Mimes Media and a really huge Star Wars nerd and JPL nerd as well. I asked you to bring artifacts, too, because we didn't have multimedia. And I don't know if everybody brought one, but what did you guys bring, just really quick? And we can.
So I was asked to bring them. So I don't know why, but I brought two things. This is our tricorder. Actually, this is one of the ones that we make, so people can buy these. And I'm going to do this, but now it's going to make noise for like 5 minutes until it stops. But people think it's cool, so I'll do it.
Yeah. Come on, this is the best panel ever.
Okay. And I also brought along something, a symbol that you guys may know. It happens to be another one of our products, but it's IDIC. If you don't know what IDIC is, it stands for Infinite Diversity, Infinite Combinations. It's a symbol from the Vulcan species, and it really speaks to, I think, a lot of what we at Roddenberry believe is the core to Star Trek, because it talks about the idea of enjoying diversity, of searching out diversity, of appreciating different ideas from different areas, different categories, different points of view, and I think that's a lot about what Star Trek is and perhaps what has made it great.
Nice.
I did not bring an artifact.
Boo!
I could describe it.
Oh, that's okay. I don't know. Steven, did you bring one? No?
I have a whole bunch of stickers. I'm not sure.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, that's her.
When I first set foot on the stage, I think it was stage 12 at Paramount Pictures for Star Trek, I was immediately handed what I was told was a smartphone. This is 1989, and there it is. It's the first Motorola flip phone.
Nice. Nice.
I tried to ask the holograms if they wanted to come, and they wouldn't.
It's okay, but we got cool
Sorry.
stuff. All right, what'd you bring, David?
I had a fun project recently. We got to make a packet that went out to all the JPL employees to kind of fuel the fire of exploration and what people do there and give everybody a chance to talk about what they do. So we made a whole bunch of stickers that are clubs and societies from the future that do things like, we've got the Titan Rowing Club, and Proxima B City College, and let's see here, we got the Secret Order of Dark Matter and Dark Energy, Europa Scuba. You got to have the Earth sticker on the back of your spacecraft as you travel throughout the solar system. So all kinds of stuff like that. And just had a little fun kind of allowing people to talk about what they do.
That's funny.
Yeah, it's cool.
Randy?
And then me, this is something not from JPL. It's an artist named Bathsheba Grossman. You can't see it from back there, so afterwards you should come up and look at it. This, the woman took the Sloan All-Sky Survey, and every dot in here is not a star, it's a galaxy. So you're looking at something that's 100 million megaparsecs.
The creator Gene Roddenberry was a way to comment on contemporary issues through the guise of science fiction. It went on to include 6 TV series so far. The original series, the animated series, The Next Generation, Deep Space Nine, Voyager, Enterprise, and the upcoming Discovery, totaling 726 episodes, 31 Emmy Awards, and 140 nominations. It also includes 13 films, over 100 video games, conventions, toys, theme park attractions, over 70 million books in print. And as of last July, the franchise has generated more than $10 billion in revenue, making Star Trek one of the highest grossing media franchises of all time. Noted for its cultural influence beyond works of science fiction, Star Trek is also noted for what was, at its time, very progressive civil rights stances. The original series included, for example, one of television's first multiracial casts, including the first televised interracial kiss. Today's Star Trek references can be found throughout pop culture, from Buffy the Vampire to VeggieTales to the names of streets. There's like a warp drive in Virginia, to the actual name of an actual space shuttle, the Enterprise. It's amazing. And NASA has actually gone on to name a number of asteroids and other people after people or elements in Star Trek. So to say that it's had a huge influence on our culture is really an understatement. So here's my first question to you, and this is our first kind of topic of conversation: is why Star Trek? What's so special about Star Trek? How did it impact you? Why is Star Trek such a phenomenon?
In my mind, Star Trek allows you to dream. I mean, it takes you from today's reality of shopping and paying your...
Sailing around throughout space and going to the variety of different planets, and then, here we are now discovering, thousands and thousands of
like your
exoplanets
job
out there.
now, right?
Right. And so, I mean, that particular kind of part of science fiction and that part coming to life is like really exciting, because we have this whole sort of history of imagining it,
I think that one of the things that Star Trek does really well is that in science fiction, oftentimes you have science fiction described as representing advances in hard sciences or advances in soft sciences, meaning you see like an Ursula when this is how people in future planets orchestrate their society. But I think in Star Trek they do a really nice job of evolving the society with the technology at the same time, which is, I'm going to of course say this because I'm a technology designer, what we do as well. And so when we're looking at the future of this technology, we're seeing around it how it's reflected in the society of Star Trek.
And that's like the best sci-fi is talking about the society around the technology, not so much the technology. How about from the Star Trek side there?
I would like to just share my introduction to Star Trek, because most good science fiction, or even great science fiction for me, are cautionary tales. Terminator, Avatar, there's a moral that directly relates to what we're living today. Star Trek for me, I was a little boy watching on TV, and it was more of a sociological revolution. I mean, sure, there were neat props, but it was the first time I saw a mixed racial group of people actually functioning together as a team, not fighting each other. And I have to say that when I was making Ghost, Whoopi Goldberg had told me that if she hadn't seen Nichelle Nichols on Star Trek, she never would have become an actress. It opened up all kinds of possibilities for her. But last thing I want to say about this is that, at the last day of shooting on Star Trek VI, I was standing on the bridge of the Enterprise, and I'm looking out on the original cast, and I had a flashback to myself in pajamas in Connecticut, watching these guys on TV, and I said, how is this possible? Why am I here?
That's awesome.
Or how did I get here?
It's a cool story.
It's funny because there's this might overlap with Steve shared with us some of the questions he might throw out, and one of the upcoming questions is what about Star Trek hit you as a child or a young person? And but I'll say the The thing that I appreciate or that stands out for me about Star Trek is it still remains one of the more hopeful visions of the future, but without being syrupy or sappy. You know, they're just doing their thing, you know, and expressing wonder, frustration, and all the things that we experience, but they're doing it out there somewhere. You know, for me, what stood out is growing up in rural Maryland, it was a future where there was no dust or dirt or grass to mow or anything like that. So that was my job at the campground I grew up at. So I was just looking for a future that you could hose off and it would be fine. And, you know, so that was why I got into it in the first place, for the spaceships. And then I think the philosophy came later. So.
Nice.
Wow, that's deep.
Yeah, it is. Thanks.
I think, I mean, to somewhat repeat, but perhaps with different words, because that's the best I can do. What these guys said, I think that Star Trek, first off, you know, is a North Star to many people. I think it's the North Star from the standpoint of ideals, from the standpoint of technology, from the standpoint of social issues and where we hope to go. And I think that similar to, and this is going to be a strange similarity or reference, but similar to Jaws, I will say, which I believe is one of the best horror films of all time, it transcended the medium itself. You know, Jaws, my argument for Jaws being one of the best is because it literally changed behavior. It caused people not to go to the beach. I don't know of any other horror film that literally caused such a dramatic change in behavior as that movie. And I think because of that, you can definitely argue, as scary as other movies might be, The Shining, you know, The Omen, and, you know, all these great films, in my opinion, you can't argue that this one did something different than the others. And I think Star Trek has done that. I think Star Trek provided fantastic adventure and enjoyable gadgets and all the things that we can experience through the television show, but it went beyond that to suggest ideas that we can then bring forth into our world, whether it be you know, changes that we want to make, ways we want to think, creations we want to come up with, that then all of a sudden brought it to a place where it wasn't just about a television show. And I think really in that is the magic of Star Trek.
And that actually ties into my next question was, I mean, did you
But I
have
just want to ask one
something to add?
thing, just to add to that. One of the things that I have to do at work, and it's a really useful thing, is the definition of the word impossible. To me, impossible is that which violates a natural law. So can a spaceship go faster than the speed of light? Right now, that's impossible. Can a human being live to be 400 years old? If you can't point to the law that says this is why it's impossible, it just means we don't know how to do it. So when the writers out there are writing stuff, and usually you can have a gimme, faster than light travel, but to me there's a difference between science fantasy and science fiction, where science fiction is the logical extrapolation of today. And Star Trek did that, and that's why it really just resonated with us. It's why 2001 is still technically correct today. It's because that's how you do it if we could do it. You're Nicola.
Yeah, I think you know the aspirational aspect of Star Trek. You know, looking back, I think we can all pretty much say that we started our love affair with Star Trek when we were kids, right? We've got that in common, and it's shaped in a lot of ways. It's shaped our worldview and it shaped our career path, whether it was actually Star Trek, the show, or going into science. So, can you talk a little bit about how Star Trek kind of shaped that aspiration for you and maybe helped you decide how did it affect your decisions as to what to do with your life?
I knew I wanted to wear like a cool outfit to work every day.
That's valid.
I can
People
answer
as
that from
uniforms?
like a different angle.
Go
I think,
ahead.
for me,
Yeah,
because strangely, I mean, I love Star Trek, but I didn't imagine that I was when I was growing up that I'd be working in anything related to space exploration or even in JPL. And somehow stumbled up there and it got there and then fell in love with all of the people with big ideas, you know, doing like this guy wants to do big things, right? And one of the things that really resonates with me relating to that show, and it really relates to what you were talking about too, is that it presents sort of this idea of the future and what is possible, plausible, right? but at the same time, it is a direct relationship to right now. And I think that's like a very powerful combination of sort of living in both worlds at the same time. One in sort of this pull of the imagination, but having that influence directly what you do right now. And that has actually affected a lot, the approach to a lot of the work that we do to help to communicate ideas of science or communicate different ideas of different missions and things. But to sort of use the call of sort of the imagination, like Star Trek did, to really kind of help to hone in on things that are important to think about right now.
I know for me, I always loved the sciences, but Star Trek really allows you to just dream about what future could be. I was one of those guys that would write to NASA for the packets and that stuff. I didn't actually think I was going to end up at the a National Research Laboratory doing deep space robotic exploration, but as I went through college, I took a class, you could argue that was related to Star Trek. It was called Intelligent Life in the Universe. And it talked about stellar evolution, the evolution of solar systems, and what life would look like. And I volunteered with this professor, and one summer I said, hey, are there any summer jobs? He goes, I just got this thing from NASA called the NASA Geology Internship Program. And I said, I'm not a geologist. He goes, yeah, but I think I can get you a place called the Jet Propulsion Laboratory and put you on the Voyager science team. And I went, so here's a guy from New York City coming out here. First day at work, you're seeing all these monitors, and it's probably a centimeter across. You see pictures of just Saturn every 3 minutes, another frame coming in, and I'm going like, oh God, I've died and gone to heaven. And I've been there ever since. Somebody else?
I wasn't smart enough to work at JPL, so I became a movie producer.
Hey, I was a C student in calculus, but I don't want to brag.
I mean, I could have worked.
Well, I think that's, my story as well. This show inspired the hell out of me, as trying to find whatever path into the sciences I could. And then, of course, realized that, taking Algebra 1 3 times is not the same thing as taking Algebra 3. But, so I decided to go towards the more creative endeavors. And, I ended up, interestingly enough, where I am through an information technology job. I got into that field and, computer networking and all that kind of stuff. And, I remember when Wi-Fi came out, and my boss, who was not particularly a Star Trek fan, I was working for a company at the time that distributed, oddly enough, Star Trek toys, amongst other things, and comic books and things like that. And he said, this is some real Star Trek shit, because when it
Wi-Fi.
came out. Yeah, exactly. And
It's all relative.
yeah, it's great. I mean, they depicted it, so maybe that's how somebody thought of it, and it's kind of like, I've been toying with this idea for a script for a while about a writer who convinces a somewhat eccentric money source that he's actually a time traveler from the future, and that he needs to influence technology today to fend off some kind of crisis in the future. But I think
Copyright Mark Haynes, 2017.
Yes, thank you. Thank you very much. Producers. So anyway. But yeah, so it's just the idea that they didn't know they were showing it at the time. They presented it realistically, and the reason that we believed it is because the actors believed it, the people we saw on screen believed it, and that was a very powerful impact because as a kid you're like, wow, I'm actually watching the future. So
I can think of a thing that was influenced my career path was the portrayal of the control center. I'm a UX UI, so I design interfaces, and I didn't know that this was something that you could do at first at the beginning of my career. So I went into electronic music, which was, in my mind, the closest to being able to control a spaceship.
Nice.
That because you have all these patches and knobs, and then I discovered that you could actually design interfaces to control robots in space. So I went that.
So
route.
like the LCARs and the interface. I mean the touch. I mean with touch interfaces. I mean let's talk
Yeah.
from practical reason. I mean practical things with design and with communication. I mean it feels like Star Trek really has affected technology in a tangible way.
Absolutely.
From Wi-Fi to the clamshell, the flip phones, right?
Yeah.
And that UX, UI is one of those, and the stuff that you do is that. Can you guys speak to any instances in your jobs where it really feels like you went, oh, this really is harkens
Yes.
back to Star Trek?
For sure. I mean, so in our lab, we are working with, we have a application that we use with the Microsoft HoloLens, and it displays the data that's been received back from the Mars rover and the Mars orbiter. It automatically generates a terrain that scientists can walk around together. They don't have to be co-located, so if oftentimes the scientists are not co-located, we'll have one at JPL and one will be in France. They can put on the device, see the latest data, walk through it. Since they're planetary geologists, they're used to doing their work by walking through the field, so this feels very natural for them. And they can see an avatar of their colleagues and have a conversation about a rock on Mars. So obviously, that is very inspired by the holodeck.
Yeah.
And I can say, designing in this world of immersive or embodied interaction, you may have been designing for the screen for a long time, but the same controls or inputs don't apply here. And so the place that we look is oftentimes to science fiction, you know. And some of it you try and you're like, oh my God, there's no way that could have actually happened in Minority Report. His arms would have been so tired, you know? But as far as looking to places where this exists, it doesn't necessarily exist in the pre-existing technology, which would be screen-based. And so science fiction, such as Star Trek, gives us some new ways to think about how we can make it more like it's presented there. And I think also in that, when you're introducing a new technology to a group of people, the science fiction that they have come to know and love is also like a training manual for how they might encounter something new and totally foreign, because they already have an expectation.
There's like a vocabulary that's been established.
Absolutely. You can say to them, it's like the holodeck, and they
Right.
say, oh,
Oh,
can I? No, you can't. There's
Sort of
no,
like-
no physical. You're not going to bring back a rock from Mars.
Right.
Don't try picking anything up.
You can't. Yeah, you can't change anything.
I think, you know, for me, and I'm not nearly as smart as the people over there, maybe over here, but no. No, I think what we're speaking of, and I'll just kind of take it from like the 10,000-foot point of view, is what I think is really actually one of the most interesting things about literally the word science fiction is the symbiotic relationship and the cyclical relationship between the two. One of the things that we appreciate so heavily about Star Trek and about Gene when he did the show and everything of that nature was his willingness to look into science and kind of understand, at least to some extent, where it is today so that he could extrapolate towards his tomorrow. And I think that when you then look at that extrapolation turning around and causing certain things to perhaps become a reality, you really recognize, you know, the constant cycle that goes on of, you know, what is available today grounding us and making something, you know, sort of exciting enough and real enough when you look at it on a screen and go, okay, you know, in the future, what we know now could become this or it could become that. And at the same time, that it becomes inspiring someone to come along, as they have, we know many people at JPL or in medicine or other things, and say, hey, you know, I love what they extrapolated, what they thought of from that. Can I make that come true? And then it begets the cycle again. So it's very interesting, and I think it's extremely exciting to recognize that as much as one is a piece of entertainment and the other is, you know, true exploration that could change our world, that they're so connected.
That cycle, was it John Lasseter that said, yeah, the technology drives the creativity and the creativity drives the technology in there. So let's talk a little bit about process from the Star Trek side of things. You know, in the writer's room or in the pitch, you know, when you guys are concepting, you know, how much does science, how much does it enter the equation at the beginning, or what's the process there, or is it
I mean,
kind of,
my opinion would actually, you know, and look, there's no answer to that because
Right.
it's so different on anything that ever happens. But I would say that the idea of creating anything is not to constrain yourself. And that's, true in imagination as much as anywhere. And because of that, I would say at first, science really shouldn't come into play. Because the truth is that you want to be able to imagine anything you can imagine. Of course, after that's been imagined or after something has happened, we got to somehow get people from here to there. I mean, I don't know how much you guys know about the history, but, the truth of the matter is that the transporter, for instance, came from the fact of a very reality-based problem of we don't have enough production time and or money
Right.
to actually take a shuttle down to these planets every 2 seconds. It eats up all the time of our episode. We'd have to build ships, and it's a problem. And the
magic
answer lied in the
transporter.
imagination of, well, what if we did this thing? Where they dematerialize and rematerialize, and all of a sudden you've got the transporter, which can now actually be something that people, I don't know if you know this, but I feel like it was 5 years ago, they actually transported a photon from this end of the room to that end of the room. And mind you, it's a photon, but they literally moved something via transporter-ish, if you will. So I think that, you don't want to start with the science of it from the standpoint of hindering where your mind could go, but I think working backwards or utilizing that once you have a problem that you need to solve as a starting point is probably something that is often done.
And we do the same thing because when we brainstorm, we just want all ideas. We give the requirement everybody needs to come up with one bad idea during one of our design sessions because it opens up this space and it allows you to go places that are just nuts. So as an example, Hubble is an 8-foot mirror-ford telescope. Scientists want to get bigger. We think the biggest thing we can fit in a fairing of a launch vehicle is something that's 12 feet by 16 feet and you do it sideways. Well, that's still not big enough. So one of the ideas that we're working on was they want to make special dust, put the dust on a spacecraft, send the spacecraft out to Lagrange point where the gravity is balanced, dump out the dust, which is fun to do in 0G, and then with 6 lasers, 3 on a side, you push on it and you shape it into a primary mirror of any size. And then for funsies, by how the lasers interfere, you can change how close the particles are to each other so you can tune it to what wavelength you want it to reflect.
Wow.
That's the granular imager. That's not in my lifetime, but
That's awesome.
that's where we start. But so,
That's the no constraints.
yeah, that's
Yeah.
just opening it up.
Pretty cool.
That's not the special dust that I'm aware of as a Hollywood TV writer.
That's the.
That's how we get there.
All right, I'll set you up.
If you use your special dust, you get to the ideas of his.
My mind has just been blown. I've just lost my.
I got a million of them.
Yeah.
Okay, right.
So, I mean, obviously there are, as scientists, you look at, we were talking about this earlier, how you see a science fiction movie or a TV show, and you're always hit smacked in the face with, how wrong the science is, from Star Trek, Star Trek, there's a lot of basis in science. Star Trek got it wrong a lot of times from simply, Dr. Crusher telling somebody to take a deep breath and hold it as they go into, decompression in vacuum space, which was exactly great if you want your lungs to explode, that sort of thing. But, warp drive, I mean, it's not possible, but it's based on some, let's talk about that. How does Star Trek take the science and just kind of then stretch it beyond, that seed is there, right?
Yeah.
The things that come to mind, transport is obviously the holodeck, the artificial gravity. That's a given, right? They're just walking around. We obviously know that's a budgetary thing, right?
Yeah, right.
We can't have them floating everywhere, but
Yeah, but you can use those ideas to inspire future stuff. So as an example, this is a little dirty laundry about JPL. We didn't get into 3D printing right away because we thought people were making plastic wrenches and great. And then all of a sudden people started making rocket fuel injectors with titanium, and you go, ooh, this is real.
it's a replicator.
So one of the things we're looking to is 4D printing.
Wait,
I'll explain it. Okay. The fourth D isn't time; it's functionality. And the 2 different flavors of this are: one is you build something additively, but it's under stress, so that when you're done with it, you can release something and it deploys. Or the really fun one, you know how you guys have printers these days with a magenta cartridge and a cyan? Well, what happens if you had a printer, 3D printer, that had a copper head, a rubber head, aluminum head, that stuff, and you additively do all the circuitry inside of it? Think of what a diode looked like the first one they made versus an integrated circuit. You're talking about the birth of a replicator here. This is where this would start. So you just extrapolate this stuff from where you get inspired from these ideas.
But can it make Earl Grey tea hot? That's
If it doesn't violate a law of nature. So,
anything
I
else?
think you just put Ace Hardware out of business.
oh yeah, they're gone. They're gonna go the same way as.
I agree with Randy. I think a lot of these ideas put into inventors, scientists, engineers, like the idea of what's possible, because we have to start somewhere, right? And we can choose anything that we want to focus on. I think someone the other day was asking me, like, what's the future of this? Is it going to be this? And it's like, the fact that you just said, is it going to be this, means people in the room heard it, means they're going to start thinking about it. It's out there, right? Whether it happens in your lifetime or not, it probably depends on how hard you work or what someone, how much influence you have.
Yeah.
But I think that Star Trek has been really successful in planting some of these really great ideas into our heads about sort of the future of communication, relationship to objects, travel, all of these kinds of
Yeah,
things.
that's interesting, the idea of planning it in the future, because it sort of takes a lot of the work out for you, right? So you have all of these people who are imagining.
There's still a lot of work.
I always say we
But
did
no, but
JPL's
hear
work
me
for
out.
them. I've always said that.
No, but so you have all of these, great minds imagining, and maybe it's technically not possible right now, but when you get to a point where you have a problem and the technology is getting a little bit better, that sort of becomes like part of this sort of just this pool of ideas and things that are constantly,
Yeah.
there, and they need to be there for you to make connections and pull them, and it's sort of rare sometimes when you have like a at least for me, a very completely original thought that doesn't come from mixing of something else, or some variation of something that has been before. So
Well, and you're not having to reinvent an idea, the wheel as far as the ideas go. Because
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
There's
Well, I just, it's, and the thing that's interesting now too is that something that was kind of the purview of higher education and government organizations like NASA is now starting to become private, which is where you're going to start seeing some very strange things that mean it will cost more when it finally comes out, I guess. But I was at a presentation. Google has a division called Google X, which is just X for the unknown. And the person I met, her job title is Chief Catalyst. And,
She gets a reaction.
apparently so. But and she and her entire job is to kind of coordinate or catalyze the scientists that are working there, and not just scientists, but engineers and doctors and just whoever they've got to come up with, what that has to do with a search engine or pop-up ads. I don't really know, but it was just the kinds of the pace of technological change is getting to the point where it's going to be hard to keep up with. It's already kind of hard to keep up with. I was having a conversation with a friend of mine about if you think about medical science, for instance, by the time you go to college, you probably stop going to the doctor regularly. Most people do between the ages of like 18 and 35 or something, unless you have some type of a chronic problem or have children. In which case, a buddy of mine's kid got sick, and we're going to the doctor, and it's stuff that, he's like, oh, we just do this, this, and this. And it's like 20 years ago, which was the last time I had, I've been to the doctor in a long time. I need to fix that, so don't take that as an example. But it was just the fact that most people lose track of what's happening, in the world. They kind of zero in, and what Star Trek does, and I think what science fiction does in general, but Star Trek does in particularly very well, is keep people's minds open and try to keep that hinge kind of lubricated, to the extent that you're willing to accept new things. as they come in. It's kind of a rambling answer, but, these guys are kind of on the bleeding edge of technology all the time, for the most part. So go ahead.
Oh,
Yeah,
I've
jump in.
definitely seen this in the work that Randy does. So Randy works with. I'm gonna.
Yeah, go ahead.
Randy
I'll go
works with scientists and engineers to help them in sort of a. If you're familiar with IDEO, the design company, help them think outside the box, which is when you get a bunch of brilliant people in the room is surprisingly difficult because the reason that oftentimes they're so good at one thing is because they're focusing
Really
on
bad
it.
at everything else.
Yeah, with blinders on. And so I think that you guys introduce sort of metaphor into the process, like, well, what can you see to where else could this be applied,
Where could it
right?
go, right, yeah.
And where can you think of something else where it exists similar? And so these kinds of stories or possibilities, I think, help in that realm of getting people to think outside of something that might be so super narrowly focused, but we need them to think a little bit further so that we can innovate.
Yeah, I mean, like a typical problem, I can't call it typical. A problem that we may have is on Mars, we're seeing these black spots on the surface, and when you do the high resolution imaging of it, you'll see that they're cave openings. Well, it's not water dissolving limestone. We think they're lava tubes that drained 3 billion years ago, and a piece falls out, forming what we call a skylight. Well, the science guys go, hey, we want to do a lava tube mission. How would you do it? Well, how would you do it? So we'll do this series of ideations where you go, okay, what are all the things you need for exploring caves? I need rope, I need light, I need wheels, I need just the whole list. And then on the next board, we'll write, well, what are all the problems? Well, how do you land? How do you drive? How do you get power and command to it? How do you get data out of it? And then on the third board, we'll see how many of those problems on board 2 we can get rid of using the stuff on board 1, and either we can actually come up with an architecture that might actually be credible, or we're pointing to what technologies we need that haven't been developed yet to give to the technology development guys. And it's really just trying to bound that problem.
It's amazing. It's amazing stuff. I'm just sitting back here, just listening to myself. Here's a question for the Star Trek guys. Now, this brings up an interesting question to me. Is like, can you think of a technology that was inspired by Star Trek that you actually now find yourself using in the production of Star Trek? Well, okay, we know all the stuff that they got right? We got FaceTime. We got all this stuff, right? They did get a lot. What do you think of automatic doors? Come on, that's how we take that for granted
Voice
now.
recognition.
What
software,
voice recognition? Yeah, voice transcription. I mean, they get a lot of stuff right. I mean, the whole touch screen. We're even beyond. The one thing I've noticed that with the technology Star Trek, they don't land on a planet and immediately get their thing out and take selfies. That's encouraging
No, our
for me.
rover
We've
does that.
gone
Yeah,
further in that way.
They do. We just don't put that in.
Okay. Check this out. But can you think of a way that your actual production and TV production in general, film production, is aided by technology that may have been inspired by Star Trek?
I mean, there's no end to the technology that is utilized in film and entertainment today. So I almost would say what's not, if you will. But I will say this, and this is the one that I love the best, because everybody knows the flip phones, and everyone knows, even the smartphones and the pads and all these kinds of things. But one thing that I actually, and I did not come up with this, I read this, but I thought it was really interesting because, there have been documentaries on Star Trek's influence on technology and what came from what and all these kinds of things. And we've met the people who made the cell phone, and they were like, yeah, and all these kinds of things. But one thing that I thought was really interesting was when someone pointed out to me the computer of the ship, and made the parallel between that and the internet. Essentially, a centralized area of organized data that you can ask for or request from as you need, and it's all there for anybody to kind of, inquire to or explore. And while not exactly the same, obviously, in a few different ways as far as its execution and its interaction and the methodologies and all that kind of stuff, in some ways, the idea of just this all-encompassing computer that would have all this information was actually what the computer of the Enterprise depicted, and is in fact what the internet today sort of is. And so it was one of those ones that I just don't hear a lot, and I kind of thought, oh, look at that one. I didn't know that one.
That's also Vicky and iRobot. I mean, so they're all over there. Right? So.
So yeah, but I mean, given that, I feel like, so much of what we utilize today was inspired by science fiction, often, like, so many times. I can't even point to probably all the things that are utilized, whether it be CGI or the way we transmit data, or the fact that, when they did Star Wars, they were working, days in the United States, and then, those would turn into the nights of the UK, and back to the days, just to get it done in time. And, those ways of doing things, whether production or otherwise, oftentimes were inspired by something of this nature. I wouldn't say purely Star Trek, of course.
And I think the one thing it still hasn't been able to deliver is more time, because even with all of the technology, you'll find that the activity expands to consume all available time.
Well, they'll tell you the computer is a time compression. I mean, it's not really helping at all. I mean, it's just.
No, it's really amazing when you think about it. So, the big one that everybody always talks about is, of course, the holodeck, and especially here at Digital Hollywood. I would be remiss if we didn't talk about our breathless anticipation of the holodeck by means of virtual reality headsets, VR. It's just the term. I have my own mental drinking game when I'm at stuff like this. How many times do I hear VR mentioned around me? And I would be on the floor. So here's my question to you. I mean, from your standpoint, virtual reality, what's your perspective? I mean, from a entertainment standpoint, from a science standpoint, from an educational standpoint, what are you most excited about? We're all saying, okay, the holodeck's on the way. VR is a step to the holodeck. So, but in reality, it feels like there's a lot of questions as to if there's any there, and a lot of applications that maybe make sense, and a lot of that do make great sense. What's your opinion?
I think from an entertainment viewpoint, one of the things that's being talked about now with friends of mine that are heavily involved in AR and VR is, what's the difference between that and a game? How do I tell a story in VR? Because I'm used to, there's the concept of the fourth wall in entertainment, where the viewer is always in a fixed position. And Trevor's done a couple projects recently, the one that you showed a couple of years ago, where it totally changes the dynamic of how to tell a story if it could be happening in 360 degrees. And, so that's one of the things we're looking at. And I mean, just something that occurred to me when we were talking about influences on technology. For better or worse, there are people who absolutely do not like the J.J. Abrams take on Star Trek versus the ones that have come before. But one of the things that you'll see in there is practical augmented reality. Everyone's like, well, the view screen is not supposed to be a window. But if you look at it, it's got graphics all over it. It's talking about what's happening outside and what you're looking at and stuff like that. So that's the kind of thing that, it's still maintaining that cycle of influence and execution between entertainment. But I think the biggest thing really is, how do you tell a story in 360 degrees? Because it's like, if I'm supposed to be paying attention to you, but I hear something over here, I mean, it's like, a lot of times people want to just veg out on the couch. I don't want to necessarily hear stuff happening around. So, I think that's the big question right now.
What's the value add that makes it worth me going through the multiple steps to put on that headset as opposed to just flipping on my TV?
One of the things I know we're doing now in proposals, when NASA says, hey, I've got $550 million, who wants to go where? You write a proposal, okay? At the end, if you're fortunate to get to the end of this process, is what's called a site visit, where NASA representatives who are reviewing a proposal come in, look at your design. What we used to do all the time is we'd have our company that's with us, that's partnering with us to make the spacecraft, make a plastic model or balsa wood or something, quarter scale, half scale, so the board can see what this spacecraft looks like. Well, for our astrophysics missions that have a little bit less of a budget, they tried something different this time. They used these guys with the virtual reality to make a spacecraft. You put on the goggles, you can see it, and you can stick your head into the spacecraft. You go right through the walls, and you can see the different subsystems. And then the next level that I'd love to see is, let's color code it. I want to see the attitude control system. So now the star tracker, sun sensor, inertial measurement, you all light up different colors, or maybe animate it so we could watch it deploy in front of us.
We already have that.
We haven't used it for proposal yet, but I'd love to see that.
Yes, come over to our lab.
yeah.
The two things. One, the thing that I see as exciting in the application in a work environment or non-entertainment way is the ability for people to interact with data collaboratively. So in the application that Randy was talking about, it's called Protospace, and what we have done is we've built a way to shave down the models that are handed over to us by the spacecraft engineers, so that they might come in at maybe 100,000 polys, and we're able to shave them down so that they can be loaded immediately onto the HoloLens, and then a team of engineers can look at their spacecraft at scale before they've built it, and walk around it, walk through it, collaboratively problem solve using hand gestures, being able to measure things, take tools and see if they can fit them in, look at how they might assemble it. And this is really, I mean, it's the value add is sort of like, oh, well, this is cool and fun, but I've actually seen it really dramatically change the dynamic of how groups of people problem solve. Because what the alternative before was to take a screenshot of your CAD software and to have one person give a very not exciting presentation to a bunch of people who could only see one perspective of a 3D model. And so you're really talking about one perspective of something that has many perspectives. And if you're trying to problem solve, it's really, really hard to follow along. And then they put on the device, and all of a sudden everyone is engaged. Everyone can walk through and see a different perspective. Everyone can talk about problem solving and see the problem in 3D. So that is something to me that is really exciting. We're able to take a 2D world in which maybe one person is driving and present it in a way where we have multiple brains trying to think and problem solve in 3D. And I think that is really where we see a lot of exciting work in what we're doing at in our lab at JPL. And then the other thing related to entertainment is that because we've been successful in getting these applications off the ground because of partnerships that we've had with Microsoft or Oculus. And so they provide early prototypes of their hardware, or oftentimes we will also partner with content developers, so people who are skilled artists, and we might need to work with them to develop some stuff. Because that is happening and in such development in the entertainment industry, it allows us to focus on the use cases of what would be really useful with our community of users, and then tap into this sort of rapidly developing workforce in entertainment.
Well, I got another question for you.
Okay.
The next thing we'd like to see, other than the flight system, and after you worked on this, is not only the flight system, but now the flight system in space. So now I could see where I can look at my spacecraft, where the exclusion zones are, making sure the sun doesn't go into my sensors, to now put it actually in the environment.
You mean for control?
Well, yeah.
Yeah, I think that we can talk afterwards. There are some things happening like that.
Oh, science is happening right here, folks. Well, Stephen and Trevor, what about from your perspective?
Well, because our company now is focused on escapist entertainment for cancer patients, we're very particular and interested in what does allow a patient to escape the pain of chemo, or the anxiety of about to go into an operation. You know, one of the things that's quite clear is not everything should be 360 VR. You know, what is the best experience for dealing with fear management? And there's so many opportunities within the medical hospital space. I mean, I lived with my daughter at Children's Hospital when she was battling a life-threatening non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, and her only escape was meditation, which wasn't bad, but I know what her anxiety levels were when she was about to have an operation, or when she went for follow-ups in the outpatient clinic. So we're running programs with doctors to see if virtual reality curated experiences will alleviate the anxiety and pain, and it's
So
quite
great.
interesting, quite complex, and in many ways more rewarding than anything I've done in the movie business, but it still is show business because we are involved in content creation. And anyway, it's a long story. But
No, that's awesome.
That's fantastic.
That's a great application. Trevor, anything to add?
Yeah, I mean, look, virtual reality I find to be a very, very complex subject or topic for a number of reasons. I think that truthfully, and this is my personal opinion, it is probably in some ways more applicable right now outside of entertainment than inside of entertainment. And I don't mean that it won't be, but I do mean that I think that it's not been figured out. Entertainment, as Mark said, is first and foremost a storytelling device of some kind. Now, that storytelling can be one of morals or issues, or it could be just one of pure enjoyment. But either way, you're taking a journey along with characters or yourself. To do that, utilizing virtual reality, as it was said, you don't want to use it all the time. There's a reason that, when you're telling a story, you want to provide opportunities for an audience to learn things, to experience things. But that's not all the time. That's not every second. And so I think that truthfully, while there's a tremendous amount going on in virtual reality right now, and I think we personally have certain ideas of how it might be utilized best, and have had some experience in that as well. The fact is that I don't think we've quite cracked it, because I think that we don't exactly know when to use it and how to use it. We just know right now it's super cool to use it.
Right.
Whereas I think in the world, when you think about the applications these people are talking about, these are very real applications. These are very formidable ways to utilize this that are going to better progress or efficiency or collaboration. And in that sense, I think that its use there is actually well overwhelmed what we figured out so far, at least in Hollywood. But it'll come. It just takes patience, and we have to hopefully see it not as a fad. That's my hope. I liken it a lot, and Mark knows this already. We've had discussions to like 3D. Remember when 3D came out and the people were like, "Ugh," and it was like, "Oh my God," But like really, that's only exciting for a moment, and then you're either getting sick or you're like, "Okay, tell me the story." You can't base something purely on that, and it showed, because 3D went away for a long time, and then it kind of came back in a much more subtle way, and even then there was backlash to it, and people sort of were like, do I like it, do you not, all this kind of stuff. And I think at the end of the day, it's because if you're not treating it as a storytelling device in some way, at least as far as the entertainment goes, then it does become a fad. It becomes a gimmick, and I think that won't do it justice.
It's kind of funny too, just on that note, thinking about, trying to tell stories inside an immersive environment in VR versus, building spacecraft or, thinking about new missions. It's kind of cool in a way that it seems like when these headsets came out, everybody was like, oh, great, it'll be just like the holodeck, right? But it's not, right? And then you're sort of left with, well, now what do we do?
Right.
So in a way, it's kind of cool because it's that dream of what it could be is what potentially kind of developed the initial kind of push to get it there. And then it's sort of this searching of how to make it sort of fit for all of the different needs that we have, and trying to find a use for it as it grows. And
it's interesting. It's, Trevor talking about how often to use it. One thing that struck me with the holodeck, the whole holodeck analogy, is nobody's ever mentioned that the main reason the holodeck was there and that they used it was because they were stuck in a can in space, right? That was all they had. When they're like in orbit around the Pleasure Planet, they're not hanging out in the holodeck, right? They're going down. Okay, maybe Barkley is hanging around. A couple of them are. But because it's like, well, this is good for this situation, but when we're back, we don't need it for entertainment because we got this great Pleasure Planet down here and Green Slave Girls and whatever. I don't know. But you know what I'm saying? It's that use case, right? And then so entertainment is kind of niche, right? from a purely entertainment standpoint. But then the other applications, the real world applications, I think those are really, really exciting. Walking around on Mars to explore it, that's amazing. That's amazing.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Come on.
It
And
works
the
pretty
medical
well.
stuff with, that's amazing. For bedridden patients who have no way to get out, and the what that can do to them and their well-being and their morale is amazing.
I think that really, I mean, if you look at a movie like Avatar, you know what I mean? That really, in many ways, is like, bringing science fiction to life in some ways, or perhaps the idea behind it, what he's doing, is the ability for you to like sort of possibly get out of your bed. Maybe you can't get out of your bed. Maybe you're scared.
Yeah.
Maybe whatever it might be, get out of your head, even for that matter, and be somewhere else, experience something else that would distract you, that would inspire you. That literally is like, sort of that movie come to life with perhaps some better intentions. So I think that, it really, again, looking at the cycle, looking at how different ways that this can be utilized, and looking at its best use, or, is really interesting.
I'll give you one practical example. I was recently hospitalized with acute bronchitis, and every 4 hours I had to breathe into this nebulizer, great name, for 15 minutes, and I had nothing to do. And I realized I had a Daydream headset, and I put it on, and the 15 minutes went like that because I was in a beautiful ice cave thousands of miles away. It was the only time the nurse had to say, "You're done," But it clearly, I wasn't in there as a cancer patient, just a regular patient. So there's huge applications for making. If you're going to be in a hospital, why not?
I got a root canal coming up.
Hey, you don't want to be there.
No, I don't want to be. Ice cave sounds great compared to it.
I think opium might help.
One thing, if we were going to take a second and kind of extrapolate technology forward, I think one of the things that I'm interested in seeing and kind of exploring also presently from a story standpoint is the day that we marry brain-computer interface and VR.
The neural interface.
So it's like, can I, exactly. It's like, can I talk to somebody who doesn't have the ability
That's a
to
Black
talk
Mirror
anymore?
episode. I'm sorry.
Yeah, sorry. I saw that one too. It was
Yeah.
good, but you see what I mean, though? It's
Yeah.
like, there was one episode. I was not a huge Star Trek Voyager fan, but I did pitch to it, so I slogged out 7 years of watching it to see if anything I pitched ever did show up, but it didn't. But there's a 2-part episode where the Voyager encounters another ship that had been lost before them, and it was a very small 20-person crew that the ship was too small to support a holodeck. And these people were going crazy, because they have no release for the stress of what they're doing until some piece of alien technology they gave them. It was a little wearable device, and it was almost like a portable, I think the guy called it a portable holodeck. Didn't have the power to create characters or narratives or anything like that, but it basically you'd be standing on a beach, just listening to the ocean. And it's like, to me, that is the most, one, it's believable. I think we could get there pretty quickly, but also it's probably one of the most beneficial. I was like, I wanted that, that sounds like, everybody listens to kind of white noise, rain sounds, whatever it takes to calm you down. And it's like, that is the kind of thing where, it could help people who have no alternative, to experience that and kind of take their mind off of what's going on. And, again, something beneficial that, that far outweighs any kind of mass entertainment appeal it might have.
Yeah, that's awesome. All right, well, we'll start wrapping things up here. We're coming up against time. Before we close, I wanted to ask you, we'll go down the aisles, the row. Getting back to Star Trek, what's your favorite episode and or movie? And Stephen, you may have to recuse yourself, right? 'Cause but we'll start with Randy.
It was from the original Star Trek series. I love the City on the Edge of Tomorrow,
City on the Edge of
even
Forever.
Keel or something. Oh man,
That one's highly regarded as the best episode. of the
I
series,
just
I
love
think.
that one.
It was the one where Kirk fashions a cannon out
That's
of
everybody. No, with the monster, right?
Yeah,
Oh yeah, what's the name of that? Where Arena,
I do love that
the
one.
Goring up at Vasquez Rocks. Yes,
Isn't
Somewhere
that
in
in
Malibu.
Galaxy
I mean-
Quest, right?
it's up in Canyon Country. Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
I would say any episode with Whoopi Goldberg.
Any episode of Whoopi Goldberg. Yeah,
all
Whoopi
of
went
her-
on to
all-
be in. Yeah,
all of her episodes are fantastic.
I have to say Star Trek II: The Wrath of Khan, written, directed by my friend Nick Meyer. That's the best one.
It is.
I would say, I mean, it's hard to pick one, I think, because I'm that big of a fan. But just recently, I was rewatching the original series, and I would say the first broadcast episode was an episode called "The Man Trap." Not an exceptionally great story, but it was the first time, you get a little bit of background of Dr. McCoy's character. But one of the things that really stood out for me, and I didn't realize this until the show came out on home video, because these are the scenes that in syndication they would be cut for time, where it's these little asides. There's a conversation between Spock and Uhura that doesn't have anything to do with the plot. There's Kirk gets a message from somebody that he's delivering something to later that you don't hear about, and it added to the layers of that show, where it was like it made me believe at that age and that they were real people. And unfortunately, as production pressure goes and budgets and all that stuff, that kind of stuff ended up getting cut the farther the series went. But they were real human characters at that point, except for the Vulcan, of course.
Yeah.
But
It is nice that we can see the uncut episodes now. Trevor?
I mean, there are so many good episodes. Obviously, City on the Edge of Forever is a fantastic episode. The Inner Light of TNG is known to be a very, very good episode. Morgan Gendel was the writer on that one. It was fantastic. I love Devil in the Dark. It was a great morale play on that front, and kind of
That was the Horta
opened up our eyes with the
episode,
Horta.
right?
Yes,
Yeah.
we sort of thought we were, saving ourselves and protecting ourselves, and essentially we ended up being the predators, not realizing it. So I think, turns of that nature are always good. Anything having to do with Data on the Next Generation, I just, fascinating character, of course. So I think there were so many, great ones. And I look, obviously even, beyond that, at the other ones, in the Voyagers and the Enterprises, and they really all have definitely, at least a handful, if not many episodes that speak to, getting to what that Star Trek is all about. And I think that, people have so many different opinions on Star Trek. Oh, that's not real Star Trek. This is Star Trek. And, they did it wrong. And it's interesting.
The animated series canon. Come on.
What I find actually interesting about that, and I'll perhaps leave with this, is that the fact that you can argue that in itself is amazing. The idea that there are enough people out here that care not only to speak their minds, but be able to have that point of view. I know so many people, take the recent 3 movies, and I know like real hardcore Star Trek fan people. Like, this is no joke. Like, any one of them you can respect and go like, yeah, they're a Star Trek fan, And each one of them will give you which one of those 3 is the best one and different answers. And you're like, how is that even possible? Like, they're all respectable people. They all are smart. They all can think, intelligently about what Star Trek is and about what entertainment is. And Star Trek really has different things for different people, and people, it's like a poem. You get to interpret it, and I think that from that standpoint, it becomes very accessible to so many.
Nice, thanks. This is getting me really excited now for the new series. I will say that. We're gonna have some Q&A, but before we do that, we're gonna have a little cage match here: the JPL people against the Star Trek people. I've got a 10-question trivia quiz, and we're gonna see who wins. All right, ready? You ready for this? We'll
I
see.
just want, real quick, the people who are fans oftentimes know a lot more than the people
Yeah.
who made the stuff. That's all I'm going to
Is this
say.
the TV shows, the movie, the...
It's the Star
Science.
Trek universe. Some are TV, some are movies. It'll
Are we
vary.
going to open this up to the?
Well, we'll
everybody
see.
else too, or-
Oh yeah, you want to have the audience? We'll see if the audience beats all of you. All right.
Yeah, they probably will.
All right, here we go. Question number 1. What was the only Star Trek TV series not to have any human females as part of the main cast?
Not that many human females.
Human females.
Oh,
The upper-
human.
What
Key
kind
word
of
is human.
females
Could be
were
Vulcan.
they?
Yeah,
Could
I'm
be
not
right.
sure what that means.
Oh, alien.
Is what?
They all had human females.
Deep Space Nine. That's the correct answer. Wow, you stumped. All right, the
Deep
audience.
Space Nine.
Number 2. Let's give them the first shot, and then we'll jump to the audience if they because we know you'll. This is the hive
You
mind.
did give us a chance.
This is the hive mind. Number 2. Who were the Ferengi modeled after? What profession?
Lawyers.
Stockbrokers? No.
I mean, you're saying traders? Yankee traders. Traders? It's his fault.
No.
No, that's see. There you go.
Lawyers.
You guys just said lawyers.
Oh, we have a disputed answer. All right. Well, we'll just number 3. What color was Spock's skin originally supposed to be?
Red.
Red.
Red. Very good.
Trevor got it.
Star Trek. Who did the voiceover for the trailers for Star Trek: The Motion Picture?
Orson Welles.
Very good. Wow. We're on a roll here.
No, we're not.
Number 5. In Star Trek II: Wrath of Khan, all of Khan's men had the same job off the set. What was it?
Coffee?
Waiter. Waiters, of course.
Telling him he was great.
It's what?
Telling him he was great.
They all.
They're all waiters, right?
No.
No. Okay.
No. Any
Say
guesses?
profession.
Let's go with lawyers again.
Lawyers? No. They were all Chippendales dancers.
No way.
That's close to lawyers.
I was gonna say club bouncers.
Who was the only actor to appear in all 80 episodes of the original Star Trek series, including the pilot?
Leonard Nimoy.
Leonard Nimoy. All right. Number 7. During the Next Generation salary negotiations,
Lawyer.
Will Wheaton was. During the Next Generation salary negotiations,
I
Will Wheaton
recuse
was,
myself from this question.
he was first offered what instead of a pay raise? According to Will Wheaton.
Frankie? No.
Promotion.
He was offered to promote his character to lieutenant.
Wow.
He didn't go for it.
A fictional raise.
Well, in lieu of the raise, we're going to raise your character to lieutenant. Number 8. What sound was used for the automatic doors sound effect in the 2009 Enterprise?
Is
This-
it a theremin?
No.
Is it
That's a good answer.
Is it some kind of synthesizer of some sort?
It's not an Apple product. It is an actual physical product. Yeah, that's a good answer, but it was the sound of a Russian train's toilet flushing.
Of course. Right, yeah, right.
I researched these. These are true.
Amazing.
Number 9. George Takei once called for peace between Star Wars and Star Trek fans by asking them to unite against which movie?
Star Wars?
No, it's Star Wars and Star Trek.
Star Wars and Star Trek.
Star Trek fans, he wanted to unite them by uniting
Stargate?
against this other movie.
Stargate. Galaxy Quest.
Twilight. Yes.
What? Really?
A fair request.
Takei. Did I say Takei? He says Takei. Anyway, number 10, the last question. While visiting the Next Generation set, former President Ronald Reagan quipped that he liked the Klingons the best because they reminded him of who?
The Ruskies.
No.
Nancy.
No?
Sorry.
Congress.
Classic.
All right, the winner of that, the Star Trek guys won that one. Yes.
Just by a little.
Sorry, guys.
Yeah.
All right, we're going to open it up for questions. This amazing group of very intimidatingly smart people. Anybody have any questions? Yes, in the back.
There's a big difference between 360 video and volumetric capture. Have you guys experienced any of that? And do you feel like that's the right kind of beginning salvo to the holiday?
Well, I think it's.
Sorry, I should repeat it for those. There's. Have you experienced any 360 video versus volumetric capture virtual reality?
So there are instances of where they've used 360 video at JPL. I think the ones that I have seen have been mostly for outreach instances, and I think again it has to do with what the use case is. So what are you designing for, and what are you hoping to achieve? If you're trying to give people spatial awareness where they can walk through something, you want them to. Like in our case, we want them to be able to see the data volumetrically as best that they can so they can have an idea of scale against their body and maybe comparison to other things and possibly discover things that might be different than they would see on just an image because they already get 2D images back from the rover. So I think I think they're both interesting technologies, and I think it just depends on the time, budget, and use case that you're trying to design for.
Yeah. I think that a lot for me would have to do with experience and immersion between those two. Really, I mean, I think that again, different needs caused for different uses, of course, and therefore everything from budgets on down could determine which might. But I think in general, the volumetric definitely allows for a bigger feeling of immersion, a bigger feeling of being there, a bigger feeling of, okay, if I were to move like this, it's the reaction of the environment is going to feel like that. And because of that, I think that it sort of is either a next step or at least provides that 360 doesn't provide. But I think that there are uses where 360 can be very conducive to whatever, again, where the goals are, just because it's sometimes faster and easier and more cost productive and all those kinds of things.
Yeah, question.
I have a question for the slightly less smart people.
That's us. Be ready. Be ready.
Since you're not,
Speak slowly.
since you're not bound by the limitation of potentially breaking a natural law, and yet you're tasked with sort of dreaming the impossible and figuring out what is fantastic or science fiction, science fantasy, and making it part of an everyday environment or the family of Star Trek or the universe of Star Trek. At what point did you come up with ideas that you thought, that's just ridiculous?
Almost every day.
Well, how did you decide, well, that idea is crazy, but we can make it happen, but this one is just so far out there, nobody would ever believe it?
I think, I mean, science fiction is definitely based on, at least one conceit for anything, any universe you're going to be in, if not a number of conceits. So, the idea is, when you enter a world of science fiction, whether it be a book or a joystick or, a movie, whatever, whatever way you enter into it, you're starting out with the understanding of like, okay, I'm going to believe for a second, or I'm going to, put aside my disbelief that this is possible. And I think from that standpoint, you're really starting from the idea of like, okay, I'm not going to base this in everything I know is true today, because I'm about to enter a world where I know it's sort of not true, at least in one or two ways. And because of that, I feel like, when you come up with an idea, I mean, I'll give you an example. We just developed something, a few years back, and the idea had to do with time manipulation. And I remember, by the way, how it worked was because I came downstairs one day in my house and I told my wife, hey, wouldn't this be cool? And she said, as she does often with my ideas, that's the dumbest thing I've ever heard of. That makes no sense. And I said, I know, but it's cool, right? Because it didn't make sense, by the way. And I had to extrapolate back to see how it could make sense, or where it could somehow ground itself in some sort of science, so that hopefully it became believable enough that someone would enter that world and say, I'll buy into it. And that is important. Believability is important, but it's still believability within the imagination. It's still believability. So I think, again, that's where the intersection of science and science fiction lands is, is it grounded in something enough scientifically? And when I say scientifically, I just mean even regular rational thought and reason. Is it grounded enough in that area that I can go there in my imagination and enjoy that? Or is it so far-fetched that I just don't believe it? And in that case, I'm going to live outside this universe and I'm never going to be able to actually enjoy it as an experience.
And I would add to that my favorite kinds of science fiction are ones that stay as close to our current reality as possible, but with just maybe one small change. And I think that's kind of what we were talking about in terms of the conceit. So for me, it always starts with, again, it's like, do you think this is cool? Like, is this a good idea? Is it a cool idea? I mean, I'm working on one now, working on a project now that, you tell people it involves things like deja vu and inspiration and where does that come from? And, if you can accept the fact that our universe is a closed system, what happens to the energy that you might call your soul, you know. So I'm coming at something, a very metaphysical topic, but I'm trying to ground it in actual physics. So I'm talking to scientists and saying, you know, how you know, the electrical impulses in somebody's brain, why are mine configured differently than Randy's, and how can I get those two things to connect, and are they already connected, and that I have, you know, that human beings over the centuries have kind of learned how to ignore it, you know, whereas, you know, as an explanation for animals that flock away from a disaster, it's like, you know, our intellect overwhelms our instinct in almost every case now. So, you know, is there a mechanism that we're not aware of that's working? But again, I want to keep it as close to the science as possible, because that's, for me as a viewer, that's what makes it real. Because then, as we talked earlier, you cross the line from science fiction to science fantasy, where you're just like, anything goes. You know, I have a laser sword. Like, how do you get it to stop at the end? You know, and
Carefully.
you know, well, I say,
Pesky laser swords.
well, I say, you know, I'm a huge Star Trek fan, and my significant other works for Lucasfilm, so we have a bit of, you know, we have the war of collectibles going on right now,
Nice.
so stuff's just moving around the house. But yeah, so, you know, anyway, that it's just that notion of whatever that science fiction element is, I'd like to keep it as close to the science as possible, and that's just me personally.
Time for one last question before we go? Or not? Last
Just
one.
a comment. I want to thank the panel. This is fantastic. We actually own the URL StarTrek.ai, so we felt compelled to come here. This has been a fantastic panel.
Oh, good.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
That'll do it. Thank you for
Okay.
coming,
Thank you,
folks.
guys.
Make sure and come up and say hi to this amazing panel. Thanks for coming, folks.